Hello everybody, and welcome back to Jimbo Guitar. I still feel like I should apologise for the delay in making videos. It was you-know-what that throttled my momentum. But I'm back now, and having a go at exploring some of the dirty or distorted sounds you can get from the Boss MG-10 amplifier. So we left the MG-10 clean video all those years ago, 2 years ago, with the amp set on the 2 and 5 setting. And by this I mean that the gain, volume and master volume were all set at 2, and the other controls were all set at 5. Now, on this amplifier, there are 3 controls that contribute to the level of distortion you can get out of the amplifier. 2 are potentiometers. One is labelled gain, and the other next to it is labelled volume. And there's also the warp control, which is a push-pull switch on the bass control. All 3 contribute in different ways to the overall distortion coming out of the amp, which in simple terms is that distorted heavy metal sound that everybody knows and loves. Now, although all 3 controls increase the gain of the amplifier, they don't work in exactly the same way. And I don't know enough about how the amplifier is constructed electrically to tell you in electronic terms, so I'm just going to try and explain it in musical terms. Now at the moment, the little Steinberger Spirit guitar is using the bridge pickup with the volume and tone controls on full, and it's going directly into the amplifier, and we've got it on our 2 and 5 clean setting. Now if I turn either the gain or volume controls up, the sound of the guitar will become more distorted when I play it. If I turn the gain up to 5, then immediately there's more distortion. And I then turn it up to 10, there's even more. And it's kind of horrible, to be honest. So we'll go back down to 3. Actually, let's go back down to 2. So whilst we leave the gain control there, let's see what happens when we play with the other one. This is the volume control. Note that the master volume control next to it changes the overall volume of the amplifier full stop, regardless of whether your gain is set to clean or distorted. Now, in terms of distortion, I think the volume control is much more musical sounding than the gain control. If you've got this amplifier and you're wondering what it can do for a traditional sounding guitarist, then this is the control that I would play with first of all. So leave the gain dial down where it is at the moment at about 2, and we'll start to crank up the volume control up to 10. Now, I think with this at 10, we have a usable musical sounding distortion, and this is the closest the amp gets using this volume control part of the amplifier's distortion circuitry. This is the closest it gets to sounding like an overdriven guitar amplifier in the traditional rock guitar sense. As with the clean tones, the EQ comes in here when I'm playing this. You see, more gain can mean a very shrill sound, so I think we could do with bringing the presence down a little. The presence is a very, very high frequency treble sound, so if I bring that control down to 2, it tames some of the very, very high frequencies that can dominate these small speakers. I'm also going to turn the middle control all the way down to 0. And I'm going to bring the bass control down to 2. And we can hear a drastic difference all of a sudden. Turning that down. It's really taking a lot of the flabbiness out of this sound. And I think now we've got a basic crunch tone that I think you could build on. Now, like I say, this is the closest I feel to an overdriven plexi type sound using this amplifier. You're never going to get exactly that from an amplifier like this, which is all solid state with two tiny 5-inch speakers. But we do get close. Now when you're playing guitar like this, one thing that is noticeable with a sound like this is that all the guitar's formal qualities are allowed to come through. So if I switch to the neck pickup, I can tell with this sound that there's a difference in the sound from the guitar. And if I switch to the middle pickup, and even try the in-between sounds, they're all distinctly different sounds. So the volume control is at 10. Now this control, the gain control, this brings in much more what you'd call harsh clipping. On its own, without the volume control contributing to the distortion sound, I think it's really pretty awful sounding. So if I turn the volume control down to 2, going back to a barely audible clean guitar sound, but I turn the gain up to 10, well, it's so harsh. In fact, it's everything that this amp and lots of solid-state amps are criticised for. They're criticised for being brittle sounding and horrible and unmusical. So I don't think we want to use that control on its own. We want to use that to start to boost the musical sound we get from the volume control being turned up high. Now, as always with a little amplifier like this, with tiny speakers, when you add gain, you want to roll back the treble. So if we go up to 5, we definitely get a boost, but it's too harsh in the high frequencies. So I'm going to knock the treble back slightly. You may just be able to hear a little difference there between 0 and 1. Let's put it now with the treble down to 1, middle at 0, bass is at 2, presence is... Well, as it is we're getting a boost here. What if we bring the presence up a little? Well, I'm actually not sure I dig that quite as much as I thought I would. And treble is very, very sensitive on here. Anyway, switching through the pickups. You can still hear with this more distorted setting that this guitar still has different sounds from its different pickups. Now let's look a bit further at this bass control. So keeping the gain, volume and master volume and other EQ controls where they are, let's bring up the bass. With perhaps a dirty pot. Now, bringing the bass control up to 5, it's getting louder. And that's moving a lot more air in this room. It may not be obvious on the video, but what's important to note here is that the guitar is beginning to lose its individuality. The amplifier is getting saturated, and whatever I throw at it from the guitar is being dominated by the amplifier now. So there's not such obvious differences between the sounds of the different pickups. There is still a bit of bite down in this bridge pickup, but whatever I play is beginning to sound a bit homogeneous. Down on these lower strings, it's all beginning to sound a bit the same. It's getting a bit sludgy and doomy. Now when we take the gain all the way up to 10, we move a lot more air again. And again, we get a lot of treble. And we need to cut that back on the presence control. That may not be obvious on the video to you, but on this setting in the room, these two little speakers are very nasal and shrill sounding, and honestly not very enjoyable. So this presence control really helps control that. So that's pretty awful sounding. Again, we need to do some work. Let's bring the bass up and see what happens with that. So, super duper saturated and sludgy and doomy, and if we want to try and dial out the middle, well, we're stuck, because it's set to 0. Now for a traditional guitarist, if we want that traditional guitar overdriven sound, we're better off backing everything off and going back to that plexi type setting with the volume on 10 and the gain much lower. But what's interesting about this amplifier at the moment for me is that it's making the whole idea of the electric guitar into a much more interesting proposition. For a lot of people, the amplifier is all about making their guitar louder. They have a Stratocaster or a Les Paul, and the amplifier makes their Stratocaster or Les Paul sound louder. Now if I want to play AC/DC riffs or play songs by other bands, this type of setting is not a good starting point. Now other people are going to say, it doesn't sound right. But if I want to think of the electric guitar as a sound generator for me to play noises and melodies, this is a totally separate thing. And with these very saturated sounds, the amplifier and guitar are working together for me as one instrument. In a sense, at this stage, if I wanted this to be louder, I would actually get another amplifier to amplify the saturated MG-10. In terms of what the instrument has become, all of the complex harmonics available in the guitar are reduced to almost a sine wave type sound on the bass strings. So you don't need a synth pedal. You don't need to buy anything to make your guitar sound wacky. When you've got a setting like this, even the pick noise is almost inaudible. There's almost no point in having it. If I play with just my fingers, there's not really much that's given by the pick because the sound is so saturated. And there really isn't a great deal of difference when I switch through the pickups to the bridge. Okay, well, maybe there's a bit of high energy zap and brittleness. I mean, it makes me think of tinfoil and sweet wrappers. The amp is basically utterly overloaded, and it's got a wonderful extreme quality to it. For playing in a band, musically, you would choose a better guitar sound than that, I'm sure. But for single note lines, it's very interesting. In particular, if I bring in my EBO, things will get loud. So I'm going to dial the volume back a teeny little bit, but it makes some really interesting super saturated sounds that are miles and miles away from a clean electric guitar sound. Pretty interesting, huh? Note here. No pedals, just the guitar going straight into the amp with an EBO. So back in the land of sludge, let's turn up the middle. Now that's a sound I'm personally very fond of. Not everybody is going to like it. It's getting out of the way of traditional rock guitar sounds, but it's getting into the territory that I like, and that I remember reading and thinking about a lot back in the mid-1980s. If the previous sound was all about the bass strings, the E, A and D strings. Turning up the mids enriches the higher G, B and E strings. Now again, this is not something you hear very much of on record as a signature riff sound. But I personally think those of you chasing that Brian May deaky sound, that overdriven transistor amplifier sound with a clipped front end, well, I think a lot of that comes in quite closely here. I don't know any Brian May licks, but have a listen while I fumble around amateurishly up on the high strings. Now if you want to get really crazy, let's turn up the treble. After the dial goes around to about 7, the extra treble really starts to thrash these little 5-inch speakers. They begin to start to fry up a little bit. And again, with this much gain, and now speaker distortion, there's not a lot of difference between the neck and the bridge pickup. What you're getting is pure amplifier. All very good. Now let's just go a little bit berserk and wind the presence all the way up. You can see, by the way, constantly throughout this video the amp has not really sitting properly on the robust and rugged workbench, but who cares? It's just beginning to fry everything right now. And here it is on full. Now, this is the reason why I think this amplifier is hated. A lot of people think, why on earth would Boss release such a thing? And I do have to say, it's not pleasant being in the room with this on, and bearing in mind the volume is just about 1. I don't know what it would sound like if it was turned up any higher, and my hearing is too precious these days to worth risking what that might sound like. Even going into Steve Albini territory, this has very few redeeming qualities. It sounds too shrill. Although it's actually quite nice if you turn the guitar volume down. All of that really is full kind of square wave awfulness. So let's start winding down the presence. And, well, there's something going on there. Perhaps an interesting sound for stunt guitar work. Maybe if you're recording and you need a part to stand out. Although I don't know how you'd ever bring that back in a live context. But this is a fascinating amplifier, and it does of course have one more trick up its sleeve, the warp control on the bass control. Now, as I've explained throughout all of this, you've got these very interactive tone controls and these two gain stages, two separate parts of the amplifier that colour the sound of the guitar. Now if I turn that down, you get less fuzz. The warp control adds even more fuzz, and it cuts out the EQ section altogether apart from the presence control. I don't know how this works, or what it does in terms of the circuit. I don't think it's a separate channel. I don't believe this is a 2-channel amplifier with this part being one channel and that part being another. It just does something inside the circuit. And I guess the amp designers knew this, and they gave it the right name. Warp. So if you thought that was a lot of fuzz and saturation and distortion, and it is almost a land of pure square waves, let's switch on the warp control. So if you ever thought, is there more? There can't be more. Well, there is more when you put that on. And that is my favourite bit about this amplifier. I loved it when I bought the amplifier in 1989 when I was 18, and I love it now, and I'm a lot older. You can work out the maths. Yes, it is a blizzard of nails. It is a swarm of wasps that all want to sting you. In fact, it might even be a swarm of hornets that know you're covered in honey. But there's something about it. Now, like I said, the EQ makes no difference. But the presence does. And if we turn the presence all the way up, well, I think by now everybody hates me in my neighbourhood, so that's coming down a little now. Now, I've never had a harmonic percolator or any of the stuff that Steve Albini uses for his sound. Those things are hard to get hold of and vintage and rare and obscure, and although there are clones and remakes, unless you've actually got one, and the other solid-state preamp he used in Big Black, along with an aluminium guitar and everything else, you're only ever going to be chasing after the idea of his sound and his gear. But if you want to go into that treble territory and think for yourself, then get one of these. Because they're not vintage, or rare, or obscure, and I don't think you should pay a lot of money for one. Because this high-end area, this high-end saturated solid-state clipping distortion, there is nothing quite like the Boss MG-10 for that sort of sound. It's nothing like any other guitar amplifier I've ever known. You could stack together all the pedals you like and try and get something like this playing through a completely clean rig, or some sort of simulator or something like that. But this amp on its own, when it becomes paired with a guitar with a big old heavy humbucker hitting that gain and then the volume control distortion and forcing it all out through the two 5-inch speakers, well, it's something else. And it's something I love. And, for example, it's something that behind me this big old Marshall can't do. Now, that amp can do loads of stuff. I really like it, and of course it's a little homage to Dave Simpson. But this can do the super saturated tiny box thing, and I love it. For what it's worth, it was actually my preferred guitar sound for the majority of the 1990s. Now, I didn't record anything or release anything very much guitar-based in the 1990s, but it's how I wanted my guitar to sound when I played it, and I still love it. And I can still imagine myself building a whole band around that sound in some shape or form. Now, one last thing about the warp control. If we turn the gain down, you will hear what it sounds like without all the gain and volume control distortion. So if we were going to go back to here and switch off the warp control, we've kind of got a clean sound. And if you pull out the warp control, you know, it's got a bit of crunch of some sort. I don't think it's as nice as having the volume control all the way up. But it's as if the gain control is super duper trebly, and then the warp control is a kind of extra distortion, but down at the bottom end of treble. If I knew the frequencies, I could say, you know, how many hertz this ought to be. Like the gain control is off in the kilohertz area of things, where the warp control is just down in the musical end of stuff. But just as an experiment, let's combine the volume control with the warp function. honestly, that's better switched off. And just for completion, let's go on full chat on the gain control. Which I don't really like, so let's bring in the warp. And it's interesting, but you need that extra gain from the volume control. You just need that. You just need that. So, the Boss MG-10. You can hear that it's got some pretty extreme distortion sounds. It doesn't particularly do musical distortion sounds for playing in bands. And of course this is so tiny, if you took it to a band practice, you'd need to put it through the PA. Which is what we used to do when I played in the band vehicle Derek. We used to use this for rehearsals in a rehearsal room and put it through the PA. But to me, ultimately, it's not just an amplifier for making the guitar louder in a band context. Instead, it's an ingredient to change the sound of the guitar completely, and in many ways it's not making the guitar louder anymore, the guitar is making the amp louder. The guitar is playing the amp, and I love it. So, come on all you noise kids, this is what it's all about. Get one of these. I think soon I need to record a track using one of these in full-on warp mode. And when I do make another video about the amplifier, it'll be interesting to take it out of the chassis and look at the circuit. I don't know enough about electronics to tell you very much about the components, but it might be useful for you to see what's inside. And there is of course a video to be made about what this amplifier sounds like through different speakers, and it's possible with this particular one, because I modded it around the back, to not only be able to plug it into the other speakers, but I can also plug a different amplifier into it, so we could test the sound of the cab. Anyway, it did take me 2 years to get around to making this video, so it might be a while. But for now, I hope the video tells you enough about the distortion sounds on this amplifier. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and of course, keep rocking.